Hello, and welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Eric Landrum, along with Garth Neufeld, your podcast hosts. As the name implies, we center on conversations about teaching, but we often veer into other interesting topics, which is the end stuff. This is episode number 130, where Garth had the opportunity to interview Viji Sathy from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Before you hear the interview, please allow me to share some listening tips and my favorite moments. I love that Viji's example of helping faculty produce SOTL, which is her new job, UNC currently, is analogous to helping, giving extra credit to students. It's this thing that people want to find time for, but often don't unless you give them some incentive and some support. I thought that I've never heard that analogy before. And I liked when Viji talks about the projects that she's doing or just innovating in general, trying a new idea in the classroom. The piece that I liked that she mentioned over and over again is that try something new or try something different. And then step 2, provide evidence that it works or not. And then step 3 was then to make a decision whether to use it or tweak it or to draw some conclusion after the fact. I think so many faculty members sometimes want to try new things, and I've known Stephen Chu to write about this, that some new fad, but that's that providing evidence that it works or not, what that Viji talks about, which is really important, and I appreciate her emphasis on that. I also really appreciated her point about, do we exclude people in higher education because they don't understand university processes? And I thought that was really insightful. I think sometimes we make assumptions that the students or even faculty members and staff members, they understand the underlying processes. And I think sometimes students get lost in their registrar's office or financial aid or registering for classes, and faculty members, especially folks like me who've been around a few decades, it's so second nature to us that I think sometimes we forget about a first-generation college student who might not have the context to understand the nuances of registration and prerequisites or doing this or how to address a faculty member in an email and all the things that help us navigate to this little world we live in. So I really appreciated her perspective. Another place where I thought was really interesting is where Garth and Viji got into a conversation about the value of Twitter and what really drew Viji to Twitter in the first place. It was, in her words, and you'll enjoy this conversation when you listen to it, it was, in some respect, it was about having an audience that may be trying things and having a group to be able to connect to that's beyond her campus, beyond her department. So if she's teaching a research methods class, for example, and she's flipped her classroom, she may not have a bunch of other instructors at UNC in her psychology department or even at UNC teaching methods doing that. But on Twitter, she could find a family. She could find a group of people that probably connect, hey, I'm teaching methods in a flipped classroom approach, and find a dozen other people on Twitter and then have that kind of group of people to compare notes. Hey, what's working for you? What potholes have you hit that you have to fill? How have you solved those problems? And I thought that was really an interesting insight that was one of her chief motivators of getting into the Twitterverse. I really appreciated when Garth started asking, and Viji essentially trusted him and opened up about her family and her background. It's always interesting, at least to me, to hear about people's backgrounds. When you go to a conference and have a conversation, you go to dinner or something, you'll talk about research, you'll gossip about your friends and get caught up on things, but oftentimes you don't get into the backstories. And that backstory feature is one of my favorite parts about Psych Sessions, I'll be honest. So I really appreciated Viji sharing her backstory. And there's one part of this, I'm not going to get too far into it because I want you to listen, but she talks about her immigrant family and the values that they espoused to advance and succeed. She's telling a story about her parents and something that her parents role modeled. Now, Viji's probably told this story dozens, if not 100 times in her life. And she's telling, it's not a visual thing, so I can't say with a straight face, but with a very calm voice. as I'm listening to it, I have to tell you, friends, I'm starting to tear up. It's just very heartfelt, and I appreciated her sharing that. But just one last observation before I let you go. It's really clear that Viji paid attention to and cherished undergraduate experiences that were important to her development and to her career trajectory later in her life. And so it comes up early on in the interview, but then it circles back a little bit later, a project that she did as an undergraduate about the model minority myth. And I didn't put it together until the second mention in the interview. And so it's really interesting how, things that she worked on early as a project per se might have had more meaning in her life as the content area, and having her think about, do I really have to do this thing that my parents set out for me, or that was predictive from my culture, or predictive of a pathway, from my family expectations. And I love that she took those experiences, and I'm pretty sure that she had to kind of fight across the grain and swim across the flow of waters in her life, and might have had to temporarily disappoint some people to make her own pathway, of which I would hope that everyone is thrilled, because she's an amazing colleague, an amazing contributor to our discipline. So anyway, I'll stop blathering now. Please enjoy this.
Welcome to another episode of Psych Sessions, and it is my pleasure to be here with Viji Sathy from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and welcome to this conversation, Viji.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I've wanted to do this for a while. In fact, I think I probably knew you on social media before we ever met in person. How long have you been doing the Twitter thing?
I think I started right around when I started teaching. So around 2009, I opened an account, but I didn't become active until about maybe 5 years into it or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. And then I think you'll have to correct me, and maybe you don't remember, but I the first time I remember meeting you maybe at an APA convention. Is that right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Like at some social hour or something.
Actually get together and things.
Totally. Yeah. Speaking of that, how are you doing? What's the situation there at UNC? Because this is, we're in September now. This may not come out for a couple months, but what's the situation there?
Well, so we're on a campus that doesn't have a vaccine mandate, although we do have a lot of students who are vaccinated, and a lot of faculty and staff who are. So high percentages of vaccination, but no mandate. So that's stressful. And we are teaching in person. So, we have rooms that have 200 students in them, masked, and the instructors there. So there's a lot of, there's just a lot that's really odd about this semester, and having been involved in some of the planning, thinking about policies and such. I'm remarking on how much every semester it feels like it's a little bit different, the variables we're having to deal with, and how we might go. So I think this semester, the newness is, what is it like to be teaching in person with large groups of people when we've all been sort of isolated for a long time, and as well teaching with masks on, and dealing with the barriers that can cause too.
Well, and maybe I'll just start here. I want to kind of get back to meeting you and Twitter, because I have questions about all that. But what is your load like, and or what are your responsibilities like in your current position there?
So I'm actually beginning a new position. So I am not teaching any courses this year. I am heading up a new program on our campus to help faculty produce Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And so I will be working with faculty and we have so many faculty on our campus who collect data, who try innovative things, who really want to be involved in the realm of scholarship of teaching and learning, but don't necessarily have the time to devote to that effort. And so my role will be to help support them in that and offer a fellowship where they might, for example, have a course release or have summer stipend to carry out that work, and then just provide the supports that they might need to, for example, to conduct an IRB or things that maybe they're not familiar with because they don't normally do that kind of work in their everyday training. That's not something that they've done. So some of the nuts and bolts assistance, as well as the helpful financial support that's needed to actually push things to the finish line.
Wow. Well, congrats. Did you set out to kind of did you have your eyes set on doing this kind of a faculty development sort of position, and how long have you been kind of heading that way for? I know that you've been dabbling at least in that for a while, right?
Yeah. Well, I've been doing some of it myself, and I have been involved in a lot of efforts on our campus where I know other faculty who are doing this. And I think it really just hit home with me when I was in the process of redesigning my statistics class. And I collected data just because I'm a methodologist, I'm a quantitative psychologist by training. So it was very natural to me to want to think about assessing the changes that I was making to my classes. And so I had collected a lot of great data and recognized pretty quickly that I had no time to actually analyze it, to write it up. And there was some discussion of that in our Center for Faculty Excellence. And they were really innovative and said, you know what, let's give you a stipend in the summer to work on this project. And that allowed me to put my kids in camp and really focus on getting a paper written up. And even still, it took me several years to really just get through the revision process, get everything out the door and published. And I really want other faculty to have a smoother experience publishing research on teaching and feel like they feel supported in the way that I felt supported in carrying out the work, and that there were people who wanted to see this go out to a wider audience. So I'm happy to be engaging in this way, and I'm glad that we have the resources to be able to support faculty to do this work, because we are recognizing how important it is as a whole and in our field, that there is a science behind the teaching, and we need to support the science of teaching in a variety of disciplines. And so anyway, I'm eager and excited to offer that support to faculty.
Yeah, it sounds like you took what needed to happen for you in your experience of getting some, and I could see it as release or stipend or something like that, something to free up your time and or finances in order to do what you want to do. And so now this is kind of the model you're carrying forward with faculty. It seems like you have some amount of empathy for the place where these faculty might be in, which is that they'd like to, but they probably can't without maybe burning themselves out, even if they did want to. And I wonder how much of a shared experience this is with lots of listeners and people who teach. I was just listening to Eric Landrum interview Aaron Richmond, and he said almost the exact same thing, that he always collected data, but it was the writing thing that takes the time, right? So are you hearing that from faculty?
Absolutely. And I know, I mean, there's at least a half a dozen courses where I know they have great data. They've got a good story that they could tell. They just have to have the time to sit down and write it, and also to figure out which journal to put it in, and to have time to deal with the revisions if there are revisions that come back. So there's a lot of investment in seeing something to publication. And right now there's not a lot of incentive to do it, because on our campus, at least, it's something that a lot of teaching faculty are really interested in, and they're devoting their efforts are in teaching, and they're collecting data on teaching, but there's no incentive structure to reward publishing research on teaching. The research on teaching is just nice if you can get it. It won't be held against you, but it's not an expectation to do it. So it is the same kind of optional kind of extra credit that we sometimes dangle in front of our students. And some people have the bandwidth to do it and some people don't. And I'd really like to see more equity around that.
Is that shifting, do you think, in higher education? I mean, in your little kind of world, is that shifting the way that we are valuing research and teaching? Or do you just see it as like, this is sort of a dead end, we're doing our own thing over here?
Oh, I don't think it's a dead end at all. I mean, this is why I think I'm excited by it, because we're at a research institution at UNC. And so we already drink the water that research is really important. And especially as a public institution, dissemination of findings is really important. So thinking through how we connect that to our mission of teaching, I think that's to me really exciting, because it really is thinking about the classroom as a lab space in some ways, and how we can provide feedback about some of the innovations we're making and help other people understand how to effectively incorporate those innovations, what kinds of benefits they might see. I think that's to me a really exciting part. It's sort of the perfect marriage between science and teaching, and working with faculty who maybe don't even have a science training, but they are really very curious about how to do this work.
That's well, you said a word there a couple times, and I love this word, but I want to just ask you about the word innovation. So because I think you're actually associated with, like, aren't you part of a group that has innovation in I don't know. I feel like I read something somewhere about you and innovation. Anyway, what does innovation kind of mean to you in terms of teaching or scholarship of teaching and learning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not an
No, it's not an easy question. It's a huge question. Yeah. Uh-huh.
We'll be right back.
At Macmillan Learning Psychology, content matters, and they know media content is more important than ever. That's why they made sure the new video collections accompanying their textbooks offer an extraordinary range of content options for introductory, developmental, and abnormal psychology courses. Classic clips, popular footage, original content. Each collection brings them together in one place where everything is assignable. Whether your students are in person or online, these videos can add something special to lectures and assignments. So when you consider one of their titles, be sure to take a look. Macmillan Learning Psychology, because content matters most when teachers have what they need to captivate their students. Go to macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions for a free content preview exclusively for Psych Sessions listeners.
I think it's hard to think of truly innovative ideas in teaching. I think there are a lot of us who hear, and especially if you're on Twitter or if you're reading a lot about teaching, or, you're very familiar with K through 12 education, there are a lot of things that are being tried in a lot of different areas. And in some ways, I think it's sort of recycling some of what we see,
sure,
or bringing in ideas from different areas and seeing how they might work. I really think of it as exploring something new in a space. And even though it might not be new in the world of teaching and learning, it's new to either your discipline or to the way that this course is typically taught. So I have a broad definition of innovation, and I really do think everybody has a place at that table in terms of thinking through how things could be done differently. We owe it to our students to try things that are different, to evaluate those differences, and ideally to provide evidence that it's either working or not working and make adjustments.
Yeah, well, and I think that's what I love about it is it speaks to being creative in the classroom, trying something, and then like the backside of it is measuring that thing. And just what I observe from you, again, social media or in our kind of interactions, is that you are always pushing a couple different things. And one of them is innovative ways of seeing things. And it seems like even some of your keynote talks are often kind of related to that theme. But I think one of the other things I wanted to ask you about is, what are those areas that you're kind of passionate about that you tend to, speak on or write about or whatever? So if we could just kind of take get the bird's eye view of the things that you're interested in right now.
Sure. Well, I speak and write a lot about inclusive teaching. So I have, with my colleague in biology on our campus, her name's Kelly Hogan, have written a lot about this topic, and we do workshops on it. And so that takes a good bit of my time disseminating information about what does it mean to be an inclusive educator? What kinds of things are we talking about? And the emphasis is always on often on the practical side of things. So not just what does it mean, but how do we incorporate it in our teaching, and making sure people understand some of the clear asks that we are offering people to think about with inclusive teaching. And then I think that spills over to a lot of the projects I work on, just inclusion in general. What does that look like? Structure is a big part of inclusion. So not providing structure really leaves a lot of people behind, because they have to figure out how to do things. So that's the lens that I see everything I do in my work roles as. So when we don't have structure, what is being read between the lines? Who knows how to do that thing? Who benefits from understanding the process, and who doesn't benefit when there's no guidance provided? So I'll give you an example of this topic. One year I was the chair of our university teaching awards. And one of the things I noticed about that process was there's a list of awards. And then if you wanted to nominate an instructor, you upload a letter for that instructor. So it's a letter. It's kind of like a reference letter, but you talk about why they deserve that award. And I noticed when I talk to students about, who is a great educator? Why would you say so? Would you consider writing a letter of recommendation? I mean, I think it intimidated them to think about putting a letter together for a professor or a TA that they had, because it's just this white page, right? What do I say?
Yep.
And so one of the things that we instituted the year that I was the chair was we essentially created a form that provided some prompts that people could consider, that not just said, this is what an effective educator does, but give us examples of what this instructor has done to support that goal. So really thinking about the evidence for that, so that we're not just getting these platitudes of like, this person was so nice and they were so caring. Well, in what ways did they demonstrate their caring? What kinds of things did they do that showed you that they really wanted you to learn the material? So really thinking through those prompts provided structure to the person who couldn't look at a blank page and know what to write, but now knows, these are the kinds of things that are helpful to communicate that this instructor is really an outstanding educator and I should nominate them for an award.
We'll be right back. Looking for more affordable quality materials for your intro psych students? Check out Hawks Learning's mastery-based courseware and texts. These materials introduce foundational psychology and research concepts that inspire students of all majors to think more critically about the world around them. Take advantage of the software features designed with student learning in mind, like customizable lessons that allow you to add videos, Google Slides, forms, and more to illustrate concepts and deepen understanding. Explore these materials, available to students for as low as $43, alongside free chapter projects and example videos at www.hawkslearning.com/psych sessions. Again, that's www.hawkslearning.com/psych sessions.
And I feel like a process like that is also so good for students because it gives them it puts them in a position where they have to also develop the evidence for liking this person, which I'm sure is the first thing, is like an emotional response. Like, I love that professor. And now you're asking them the why of it, which is probably more helpful to the committee as well. Right. But it seems to me like what you're explaining to me, it sounds to me like an assignment that I, probably once had in a class that was really not a great assignment, where it wasn't clear for students what they were supposed to be doing, how they exactly were supposed to be doing it. And it sounds like in that situation, with all of your teaching and transparency and all of those experiences, that you could come in and see the problem right away with that process. Do you feel like being in the classroom and being a professor has, a teaching professor has kind of given you skills that are working their way out into the different parts of your institution to address these systems? Yeah.
Absolutely. Definitely. I see some of the pain points because I can empathize with that student experience when they say, I don't know, I'm overwhelmed, I have this issue, or there are a lot of times when I have conversations with students that I see that we have challenges in our university, that we either providing resources or guidance around different things. But I also think a large part of that lens that I view the world in just comes from my own experience of having to figure things out and being really unsure about if I came to the right conclusion. And I wonder how much of this is so open that we are really excluding people because they don't know how to navigate the process, or they're misreading or misinterpreting. And I want people to feel comfortable and like they belong. And that means that we need to provide more guidance in a lot of situations.
Yeah. I love it. So tell me, what do you and her last name is Hogan. No, Eddie. No, Hogan.
Hogan, Kelly.
Okay, sorry. I think has Kelly Hogan done some work with Eddie from Washington,
Eddie, yeah.
University of Washington. Okay, perfect. They wrote an article that I love, that I leaned on for a number of years, called Under the Hood, that I just loved. Anyway, what are you all working on right now, or are you working on something together?
Yes, we have a book that is going to get published next year. So on
inclusive teaching?
On inclusive teaching in higher ed. And it will be in the WVU Press Teaching and Learning series. We're really excited about it. We are in the process of making the final revisions, and we'll see, I'm sure, just the last little bits need to be carried out, and then it's scheduled for publication for next summer, I think.
Congratulations. That is so great. How long have you all been working together, giving talks, putting stuff together for faculty? How long has that relationship been going?
Oh, that's a great question. I think at least 4 years now.
Okay.
We met at a faculty learning community and really hit it off, and have since just been not just colleagues and co-authors on things, but good friends. And we work well together, and it's just a joy to work with her and to do a lot of different projects on our campus together.
When you work with somebody on like inclusive teaching in higher education or something like that, and you're giving workshops, does the book eventually just come out of those things? Like, we've already done this work, we've already we know the literature, we've done these workshops, it's like a very natural next step?
In some ways, yes. And we've considered a lot of the kinds of questions that come up in the workshops and how we might address them in the book. The way we frame the workshop is a lot of what we discuss in the book. And then we also realize that there's so much more we could have included in the book that we didn't, because when you think about inclusive teaching, it's really every aspect of teaching could be colored by that approach. So what we wanted to do is to really start to get the reader to understand some of the themes and hopefully start to think about other situations and how they might transfer those themes into those situations. So working towards eventually being able to apply it to any topic that you might have, but giving enough examples so that you understood what we meant by it.
Yeah. So if I'm a instructor listening to this right now, and so Viji Sathy is here, and I'm an instructor thinking, okay, Viji, I want to make my classroom more inclusive. I don't know where to start. What do you usually tell people with a question like that? Like, where is an entry point for kind of the rest of us who aren't experts on this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure you're already doing many things that would be considered inclusive teaching. So I think one key thing is to just understand what we mean by it. So we wrote a piece in the Chronicle that came out 2 years ago, an advice guide. And I think that's probably a nice, succinct way to at least understand what we mean by it. And the kinds of, we put them in two bins, like the classroom interactions or facilitation among students, as well as the course design. And so how things could fit in one or the other. We have made a pretty conscientious effort not to overly rely on things like diversifying content because we understand that instructors teach a variety of disciplines. Content varies from course to course. So we wanted to focus on things that are universal in teaching and that could apply to any course and that instructors could see themselves in. So we didn't focus too much on how one's content could be diversified, although it is an important aspect of inclusive teaching.
All right. So, folks, I think the first thing you do is go to that Chronicle article and read that advice guide, right? I think that's great. So thanks for that. So I know that you, when it comes to social media, you have lots to say, and like how did you decide that is? And I don't know if you're other places other than Twitter. I see you on Twitter because that's where I am. But I do a lot of just watching on Twitter. I don't do a lot of posting. But I'm going to ask you about Twitter and then other social media, and then I want to ask you just get into your kind of personal story a little bit, because you actually share some of that on Twitter as well. Some of your trips and those kinds of things. So that's always fun to see. But first of all, talk to me about Twitter, because there are some people who do it really well, like yourself. And there's, I guess lots of people out there. I don't consider myself one of them. But talk to us about Twitter and how you use that and how that came about for you. And just whatever your associations are with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't remember why I set up an account when I did. I think it was mainly because I was curious about what was happening in Twitter.
It's probably because you were an innovator from the beginning and you're like, this seems new, right? Because 10 years ago, Twitter wasn't what it is now, for sure, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was definitely more of an observer in those first few years, seeing who was out there. I don't know what the impetus was for becoming more involved. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was teaching courses in ways that I had not encountered others teaching them. So for example, the flipped format, that was something I got into fairly early, and I just wasn't finding people to connect with on my own campus. There were a few people who were using some aspects of it. I think I just wanted to learn from more people and also just connect with more people outside my area. The other thing that I think, and this definitely touches on the personal side of things, I think sometimes when you are innovating or you're trying something new, it's very, it's kind of a lonely place. You don't know if you're doing it the most effectively, and you can talk to people, but that doesn't necessarily give you the comfort you might like to have when you're trying something new. And especially being a woman, a person of color, there were things that I just felt like I needed to have a broader set of people to talk to. And so I had hoped that Twitter would be a place where I could find not just like-minded people, but people who could also challenge some of the ideas that are there. And I liked the format a lot, that is a succinct, way to share ideas, to find people. So I can't say exactly how. I think it was one of those things where I started to do a little bit more of identifying sources and people, and then sharing things. And it's ironic because I think of myself as a very quiet person, and somebody who doesn't enjoy talking very much. And so when people find me and they say, "Oh, I know you from Twitter," or they share things they learned about me from Twitter, I'm like, "Oh yeah, I did post that." That's how they know that about me.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, that's interesting because you post a lot, which would probably make some folks just assume that you are really extroverted. I don't know that that's the case. That's not the case.
Definitely card-carrying introvert.
Okay. Yeah. But maybe that's where Twitter is a great place for folks, from across that spectrum, from introverted to extroverted, because the introverted people, they probably think about a lot of different things, and to have that sounding board, and it's so fast, and it's a really wide cross section of people, right? Yeah, to some extent. Yeah. So I can see how that quick feedback and kind of getting that feedback would be really meaningful. So how does your department operate at UNC? I mean, you've obviously found some great colleagues and friends, I'm sure, even outside of the psychology department. Were you in the psychology department before you started this faculty?
I have an appointment in psychology and neuroscience. Yes.
Okay. So I guess the question is, how do your professional communities meet different needs for you?
Mm-hmm.
That's just a personal interest question.
Mm-hmm. Well, so within the department, and I think there are a lot of psychology departments. So ours is a combined psychology and neuroscience department as of a couple of years ago. But one thing that I think is not unique to us is that, stats and methods is a set of courses that every department has. And our department is not unlike others, where there are a couple of faculty who these are their sort of core rotation of classes. So I and continue to have a couple of colleagues to talk about specific issues related to teaching statistics and methods. But then, of course, there's people in economics who teach these kinds of topics. There are people in public health who teach these kind of topics. So I've always appreciated the fact that stats and methods extend beyond psychology, and that there are people who study these topics and teach these topics outside of our discipline. So it's really helpful, I think, to identify those people. And I think you can feel, again, a little bit isolated if you've only got one or two people in the department who are doing this. And one thing I'll say about teaching stats and methods within psychology is these are required courses beyond intro psych. And intro psych is one that lots of students flock to for a variety of reasons. So they love being in that class. But as soon as you get them into the next required class, which is statistics or methods, it's almost like torture that they're in there. They have no idea why they're required to take the course. So I have embraced that challenge with my students. I love teaching a course that they have low expectations for, because you have nowhere to go but up from there. But it is hard as an instructor I think within psychology, to teach these courses, because most people who teach courses, if you don't teach outside methods and stats, you find students who are there because they love the topic, or they're genuinely curious about it. I think we find the most resistant learners in these statistics and methods courses. So I felt like it's like finding your people is even harder in that environment.
Right. Yeah. So that's interesting, because then on Twitter, if you're kind of putting on your method stats hat, that gives you access to lots of people outside of psychology, which is, that's it. Just, I think, gives you a broader view of maybe what's going on in higher education. And so it's not surprising that you would reach out to a biologist in right. Hogan is a biologist. Is that right? Yeah. Yeah. So, I had another question about, oh, here's my question. Got it. So for stats methods, because so many people experience this with their students who, and I teach research methods, I don't teach stats. So I get this a little bit. In my institution, students kind of understand that they have an expectation that this is going to be difficult. So there's a little fear around it as well. But is there anything that you do in particular with your students, starting with their very low expectations about the course? Is there anything, any way that you kind of approach that with them?
Oh, yeah. I approach it a little bit differently in each class. And so in statistics, one of the things I do early on is I give a pre-course survey. And so it's a little bit of me getting to know them, kind of a survey, as well as collecting some of that data. So if ever I make changes, I have the opportunity to take some things at baseline. So I have things like their anxiety around a quantitative subject captured there. But one of the questions that I ask them is, if you weren't required to take this course in statistics, what's the likelihood that you would? And then they have to respond. And then on day one, I share that data back to the students in the format of a histogram so they could see the scale and the responses. And I talk about the fact that we're going to talk about visualizing data as a way of summarizing information. And then they also see the key point I'm trying to make is that usually about 75% of them will say that they're not likely to take the course, right? So it's helpful to send the message that there are a good number of people around you who also have trepidation about this. And so I think it sets the groundwork on day one that, yes, some of you would, but a lot of you wouldn't be in this class. So let's all take that experience and understand the frame that we're coming into with the course, and that it's my job and goal is to help them understand it and to figure out why it fits in the study of psychology. So that at the end of the semester, when I ask them the question, how important is it to know about statistics, or how valuable is it? The histogram is a complete opposite version of it, where a lot of them are saying it's essential and that knowing this information is really helpful. And I can juxtapose those two things in the last day to say, here's what we've done here, made the argument that this is important. And I really relish that opportunity. And for methods, it's a slightly different approach. I think I often talk to them because they're mostly upper, so they're like juniors and seniors by the time they take that class, that I'm really, in many ways, like their guide in navigating research and helping them to understand the tools that exist. And not that I have expectations that they will necessarily want to do research in the future, but that they will always be consumers of research, and that they should feel comfortable navigating the research space to answer questions that pertain to them.
What is it like to think about not being in the classroom this year? This is the first year, right, that you are going to move full time in out of the classroom, and and so I guess the second part of that question is, do you foresee that you're going to be kind of moving permanently into a faculty development full-time role?
I'm not sure. It's too early to say. I think it's too early to say. But For right now, at least, I won't be teaching in the spring and the fall. I always have the opportunity to teach in the summer, and I can teach whenever I would like to teach. But as we're getting things started, I want to devote my time to this project. It's really strange at this moment to not be in the classroom regularly, because it's such a, it's just a moment in teaching. I feel like that a lot of my peers are experiencing something that I feel we're all going to be living with from years from now. We're going to talk about this period in 100%. Our careers. And so in some ways, I feel a little bit sad for not being in the classroom to experience that with my colleagues. In some ways, I feel a little bit of relief in not having to think about some of the issues that have been thorny issues for colleagues during this time. But I think the way I'm mainly grappling with that is that it really has renewed my interest in helping to support faculty in allowing basically putting myself into this full so that they have the bandwidth to do the best teaching they can do, and letting me handle some things that they maybe don't have the bandwidth for. Is the way I'm thinking of it.
Yeah. It seems like it's just a new playground, because you were in the classroom kind of playing with, with data and with ideas and measuring those. And now it's just, it's really the same thing. It's just one step removed, where you get to help other people do it, which is pretty great. Well, hey, as we've kind of talked a lot about the present and what you're doing right now. Often we dive back into like, how did you get to this place? And so I don't know how far back we want to go, but I wonder if, like, when you decided to go to college, and I know where you went for your undergraduate degree. Like, how did that, like, were you, this is Eric's favorite question. Were you always going to go to college somewhere? Was that an option not to go to college, or how did that work out in your family?
Yeah, it was not in fact, the expectation was that I was going to go to medical school. So okay. that was the goal from, I don't know how long ago. So college was just the way to medical school. Yep.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small town. It's called Hope Mills in North Carolina. And it is just outside a slightly bigger place called Fayetteville, North Carolina. It's a military area. So we have Fort Bragg is near there. So we have a large group of, in fact, very diverse groups of people that live in that part of North Carolina.
Were your folks in the military?
They were not in the military, but we had I had an uncle who was in the military who lived in this area. So that's how we ended up here.
Okay. And I am just going to make the assumption that you just never left. Is that right?
No,
I mean, as far as you've been settled in North Carolina since, right?
No, I grew up in Hope Mills. I did go to the big city, Fayetteville, for high school. Uh-huh. My parents really wanted me to go to what they deemed the best school in the area, so public school there. And so I went to high school in Fayetteville, and then I immediately came to University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for my undergrad. My parents expected that I would be in state, that we would not be able to afford anything out of state. So I applied to a handful of schools in the area that I thought could help me get to med school, still thinking that was the plan.
Yep.
And Carolina was the best, in my opinion, at that time. And that's where I ended up. And then I had the amazing opportunity to take a stats course as a psychology major, with a faculty member who just really opened my eyes about what statistics is and what it could do. And I had always appreciated quantitative subjects, but I never really got the point of it. And when I took the stats class and we did a project and I really dove into that project, I got now I understand the concept of flow. Like I got into flow working on that project, and I thought there's something here that I should explore this passion. And so I asked that faculty member if I could continue working with them on an honors project. And that led to me thinking about quantitative psychology as a career. And I did take a gap year. I worked in a measurement-oriented firm in Los Angeles after my college days. So I spent a year in Los Angeles doing a lot of the kinds of things I learned as an undergraduate. So some programming in SPSS, creating reports. And then I came back to graduate school at UNC, which has a really great psychometrics program. And then I graduated, and I actually took a position in industry. So I worked for 5 years at the College Board on the SATs. So I was part of the research team there, working closely with colleagues at ETS, not so much on administration, but thinking through some of the redesign efforts at that time, incorporating writing into the SAT, thinking about just different kinds of research questions that were coming up for people related to the SAT. And then my husband and I decided to start a family, and we quickly outgrew our 600 square feet in New York City. And we had family in North Carolina, and I learned about this position of a teaching position that was available. And I had always dreamed of coming back to teach. And it just felt like maybe that dream should happen sooner rather than later. So I took the position to teach at Carolina, and I've been there since.
Wow. So there is so much there. And it's very cool that you kind of came back home in a way. And I'm sure that's for many reasons. Can I just jump back to your parents seem, from just the little you've shared, it seems like they knew the value of education and that they really emphasized it. And even though it sounds like your family didn't have all the money in the world to send you wherever you wanted to go, that they were going to sacrifice and make that happen and support that. How did your parents learn that lesson, or what did they what were their careers or educations?
That's a great question. So they, like many immigrant families, really valued education as a way to advance in their new communities, to think about success. And so my parents, and especially, so my heritage is I'm Indian, and the culture there is very much that teachers are revered. They're really, along with elders, like there's just this category of people, and teachers are part of that category that you respect, and that you really are in awe of, and that they do a great service to our community. So I grew up feeling that way. And one of the small things I remember is that every year on the first day of school, my mom loved to grow roses. And so she would clip a rose, and she'd ask me to send it to my teacher. So I spent every first day of school taking a rose to my teacher. I don't even know how long. I think that went through high school. I'm not even sure. She probably sent me with several roses at that point. But it was just one of those things where it was not a question of like, you'll do your schoolwork. It's like, you'll do your best. And that's your job, is to focus on being a great student. And they both are lifelong learners. My dad both of them actually went to community colleges, and my mom got her training to be a surgical technician after being a nurse's aide. Like, she went from program to program, and I grew up watching them study at the kitchen table, taking exams. My dad got a new degree, and that involved he would drive to Raleigh, which was an hour and a half away, to take a class. So I saw them continuing to learn as adults, and even up until I think my dad was 60 when he took his last like major exam to get training for project management. That was just something I grew up with, that you never stop learning, you never stop pushing yourself to figure new things out.
Do you have siblings as well?
I do. I have a brother who is 5 years younger than me, who's also an educator. He's in the K through 12 space, and we both do very similar work. He does a lot of work on inclusive teaching in especially elementary school aged kids. So we have a lot of really great conversations, and we actually live together is the other thing. He lives with my family. So my kids are drinking the Kool-Aid in terms of what it means to be an educator and all the kinds of issues we all grapple with. My
next question was, how far does he live from you? And it's not far.
Yeah. It's in our basement.
Yeah. Okay. So, but why medical school? Why was that the thing? And then how did you kind of navigate? Because you started on that track. At what point did you realize? So, two-part question. One, why medical school? Why was that the goal at first? And then how did you end up from there to moving towards psychology? And it may have been that faculty member you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Well, medical school, only because there were really limited options in terms of what people thought of as really professions that one could go into. And there were and are a lot of Indian doctors. So it's a really easy thing to think about going into medical school. I think there were, it's a handful of things, like you could be a lawyer, a doctor, maybe a business person, but that felt a little less like, how do you become that? There's a little less pathway there. Right. So medical school offers a lot of structure in how to get there. And so that seems like an easy thing to be able to at least know the benchmarks and what it takes to be in that space. I liked the idea of being in medical school. I liked science. And then I got to college and chemistry was my major when I initially started. And I just wasn't enjoying it. And I couldn't imagine taking more classes that were like that. And I felt like, well, maybe I don't have to major in chemistry to still go to medical school. Maybe there's some other major I could have. And of course, my naivete, there's a lot of things you could major in and still go to medical school. But I thought of psychology as another avenue and started to take more courses and really enjoyed that. So I hadn't closed the door on medical school. And then it wasn't really until that statistics class that I really started to second guess myself and think about what I wanted rather than what I sort of grew up feeling like was the right thing to do. And that it was a really hard time in my life because there were a lot of things I was questioning, who I was going to be, what I was going to do. In my culture, it's very common to have an arranged marriage. So, there was pressure at that time to be considering how that fit into my goals and plans for the future when all I wanted to do was like get through college. And in some ways, I think going to graduate school was a way for me to buy time to figure it out and allow my parents to see I was working on a goal that I didn't really need to get married right away. And so there were a lot of things, pressures, external things that I just kept trying to be laser focused on education just to keep going because I knew that everybody was on board with that.
Yeah. So you take this course and at that point, you just kind of wake up to your own passion. Like this is what it's like to be super interested in something. Like I thought I liked school, but I love this.
Yeah. It was that project where I did a little bit of work around the model minority myth and connected it to something in my life. And I started to get the point of statistics. And then really where I think the turning point came was I took a religious studies course in my senior year, and the instructor asked us to study, it was on Hindu rituals, and the instructor asked us to study a Hindu ritual. And I basically turned it into a science project. Like I surveyed people and I created this sampling strategy. I collected the data, I analyzed it, and I gave the report to the instructor. And she said, I've never seen anybody collect data and write a results section for a religious studies paper. And that was when I thought, okay, there's something here that I can't ignore. And I really need to think about how this fits into my future.
It's fascinating to hear that. So you're like 21, 22 at the time when you hand in this paper, and it's like your whole future is actually written into that process because you've at this point done the inclusive kind of piece. The model minority has its start kind of within you, and then you love the science and you're bringing that everywhere you go, and you're still doing all those things this much time later. So now you said that you continued to work on a next project with this instructor. What was that project about?
That project was, so I expressed interest in quantitative psychology, and I had been working in a social psych lab as an RA. And so essentially I was able to analyze some of the data that we were collecting as part of that project. And it had to do with the Big Five and comparing different modes of assessing the Big Five in individuals, a card sort and a survey. So looking at convergent and discriminative validity with the Big Five. And one of the fun things that came out of this, thinking about that project, is as an RA, we had to code words that people use to describe themselves. And this was something that was salient to me, is we got to, somebody described themselves as average in the description. And So we had a lab meeting where we had to decide, was that a positive or negative trait? And I was the only one who really argued for positive. And it really just highlighted to me how much culture plays a part in how we measure things and how we see things. And
oh my goodness, everybody at home right now was just going negative, obviously negative. and then you said positive. Yeah. So sorry, I cut you off there.
No.
So what was your like graduate work on? Like, what did you, was it more kind of, no, was it social psychology? Was it inclusivity and diversity and?
Yeah. So so I was really interested in program evaluation, and I continue to be. So I did, my master's project was an evaluation of a women's leadership program. So we had a really robust program called Bridges that was, our university is part of a system, and our system has this program that was available to basically women faculty to cultivate leadership skills. And so my advisor was part of the program and also knew that they were looking to understand what the impact of that experience was. And so offered that as an opportunity for me to practice and learn how to do program evaluation. So I conducted interviews with participants and identified themes and produced a report that really showed what kinds of things people were walking away with that program having demonstrated skills for. So combining doing some mixed methods type of work, qualitative and quantitative data analysis. And then my dissertation, I shifted gears a little bit. I had taken an item response theory class. I really liked really getting into those kind of measurement issues. So I, in specific differential item functioning, looking at how some items might work differently for different groups of individuals. So I had access to a health questionnaire. It was on functioning for individuals with arthritis. So I was looking at the functioning of something called the health assessment questionnaire for those who have arthritis and those who do not, and just digging into some of those methodological types of questions and trying to understand if the instrument worked the same way for clinical populations.
Wow, and this then. You take obviously all those skills that you develop and you go work for ETS for a while.
College Board.
It was College Board. I'm sorry, yeah. College Board. Yeah. And I was thinking that's got to be in New Jersey or New York City, but is it in Manhattan? Is that where you work?
It is in Manhattan. Yes.
Okay. And what was that like? Because I think I'll just say for me, I'm thinking about College Board. I'm thinking about test measurement, and that wouldn't be a good fit. Let me put it that way for me. But was that work that you were really passionate about and that
I loved it.
Okay, cool. So what did you do? What did you do day in and day out? It was SATs related, right?
It was, yes, all SAT. I was on the SAT team. They have other teams like an AP team and SAT2s, all kinds of different teams. We were a fairly small group of people. A lot of it had to do with working closely with our colleagues at ETS, who are the administrators of the SAT. So thinking about issues of linking across administrations. And in my case, again, thinking through the rollout at that time of the writing portion of the SAT. So there were all kinds of projects that we did. One project in particular was looking at trends in disparities on the SAT for different groups of students based on race and ethnicity, thinking about the correlates like income with SAT. I think the one thing that was challenging about that job is that I think of the SAT as a tool, and especially when high schools administer grades in different ways. I think college counselors and admissions officers often know which high schools are challenging for their students, and which, there's just a lot of guesswork that happens with what is the preparation of a student for success in college. And so I think of the SAT as a really helpful tool, as another data point for people. And of course, during COVID times, we've seen a lot of institutions go SAT optional, NACT optional. So I don't know what the future of standardized testing looks like. But I think one challenge that I faced or considered or had faced in that space was feeling like the bad person in every meeting that you go to, right? Like if any external meeting, people often have really negative associations with this test, and continue even into adulthood can tell you their horror stories of taking this test and what it meant for them and how it labeled them. And so I think that was a challenge for me, because I don't really like being on the receiving end of some of those criticisms. So that was tough. But and in general, I'd say thinking about refining an instrument, thinking about the limitations of that instrument and how we might expand beyond it, those were exciting questions for me.
Yeah. What was it exciting to be able to look into those questions related to equity and to try to solve those? And are they solvable?
Yeah. I enjoy thinking about these things. I really like thinking about where our system might be ineffective and how we might be able to help more students succeed. I think it's also really tough because we see these kinds of gaps as young as, kindergarten, right? Like, so sometimes it feels like all we're doing is reflecting all the educational disparities that exist prior to taking SATs or coming into higher ed spaces. So I like engaging in conversations about where things might be broken and how we might fix them. But again, I think of the SAT as one tool among many tools that can help identify issues that we might like to remedy. And being in the higher ed space more recently has really helped me see the kinds of skills that students carry that may not be demonstratable in a standardized test. And how do we cultivate those skills early and help students be more successful for jobs that we can't imagine right now? We can't even we don't have words for what the jobs of 10 years will look like, or the roles that they have, but we know the skills that are likely to be helpful to them, and how do we cultivate those skills?
Well, that's really helpful to hear. And I just have to say, you think you maybe know somebody by watching their social media account or having a few professional interactions, but it's not until you really get their whole backstory that, of course, you talk about the things you talk about now. Of course, you tweet about the things you tweet about. This is something that you have all of these skills and experience, not only in higher education, but also out in the quote unquote real world. Right. And you are bringing that expertise to us. So I appreciate it. I'll definitely be kind of reading the things that you put out with from a different perspective, having heard all of this. How long have you been back at UNC now? How long have you been teaching there?
12 years.
12 years. Okay. 12 years. And that has, was that into a teaching professor role, or was it that was what you were hired into? And then, and then over time, kind of moving into some different roles. Do you see yourself moving into other roles? Does Dean interest you at all, or anything like that someday?
Yeah. This is one of those things where I'm also at this time in my life where I'm thinking about what do I want? And one of the things that excites me about the positions that I've been able to be a part of on my campus is they are in some ways administrative, and they touch more students than the ones that are in my classroom. And that excites me. And especially with faculty development, the ability to reach even more students through the faculty I work with, and the policies and the tools that we create on our campus. I really like thinking about the systems approach for change, and and influencing culture. I think that's something that's really interesting to me. I'm finding my voice and finding my, what I can comfortably speak about. I'm learning that I should speak up and that there are people willing to listen. So I appreciate Twitter helping me amplify some of these messages, and understanding what is helpful to people to know about is really great too. That kind of feedback that I get from there, as well as from my colleagues on campus. So I think I'm entering this new era where I'm realizing I have a lot of experience and expertise to bring. I just need to learn where is it best directed for the most impact, and I'm really eager to explore that a little bit further, and especially leadership. I think that's something that is very intriguing to me, because it's again, as an introvert, as somebody who very much likes working behind the scenes on things, I think it's hard to imagine oneself as a leader, but I am really questioning the way we frame leadership and how we talk about leadership, and at least in the United States. And I think there is room for more people there, and especially people who don't traditionally see themselves as leaders.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm excited for you and what the future has for you. I'm kind of grieving for my little area, which is the Society for the Teaching of Psychology, which I'll probably spend a career kind of in and as a part of. It seems like to me that though you have a place there, and you will always have a place there, that you have a lot of other things going on with probably other groups as well. So that means that we're going to see less and less of you. I don't know. That's I'm guessing.
No, I don't know about that. I think
okay.
I'm going to continue to be involved. It'll be in a different capacity. That's
for sure. Well, hey, I've kept you kind of for an hour here, and is there anything that we didn't touch on? Are you like promoting anything right now? I know you got a book coming out. Is there anything else that we missed? Any kind of secret passions that you want to talk about?
Not really. I mean, our workshops, we continue to offer those remotely. Mostly people are very interested in doing remote workshops at this time. So we've adapted that well.
And where can they find that information? Is there a website?
Yeah, it's called Inclusified. So it's Inclusify. Well, I should probably spell it out for you, but it ends in ED. I can give you a link to it.
Okay. Awesome.
Inclusified.com is where they can learn about the different kinds of workshops we're offering. And then, I think in general, the kinds of work that I'm thinking about these days are really in data and tools that can help improve teaching. So evaluating teaching, looking at student evaluations of teaching, improving the feedback we can, or the way we report that information, contextualizing that information, as well as looking at equity and grades. So developing dashboards on our campus so faculty can see how men and women are doing in their classes, how first gen and non-first gen students are doing in their classes, harnessing data, again, using all my stats skills, quantitative skills to really think about evidence and data as one piece of the puzzle for equity. And there are lots of other ways to be persuasive to think about inclusion, but that's one that I'm really passionate about, just because I know that numbers can tell a really great story. And I want people to feel that is a tool in their toolkit.
Well, that's great. And I look forward to hearing more about that, maybe through the Society for the Teaching of Psychology, or as you put things out on Twitter, with whichever hat you have on at that time. So, folks, I just want to, again, thank you, Dr. Viji Sathy, for joining me today. We have all learned a ton, and make sure you visit inclusified.com. Make sure you visit inclusified.com if you are interested in those workshops. Thanks, Viji. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. This is fun.